York Times recently online, and there's this interesting story about the struggle that science teachers are having in Florida because the state now mandates that they teach evolution. It's been incorporated formally within the state standards. It's caused a lot of unrest because there's no shortage of evangelical teachers down there. And I was reminded of the one vivid memory that I have of my own about evolution in school. I grew up in the late 70s in rural Pennsylvania, and my class was small. There were only 55 people in my graduating class and probably 10 fewer in my sister's class a few years later. So there weren't many people there. Pretty traditional people. I think that evolution just wasn't really thought about. But nevertheless, savvy individuals knew that it was a threat. It was in the public discourse, and you could never completely escape it, no matter where you were back in those days. And this one day, the science teacher I had, we'll call him Mr. G. This is in the 7th grade now. Mr. G decided he was going to bring up the word, and he did. He said something to the effect that this is how evolution explains this aspect of the world. I don't remember what it was, but very minor discussion point that suddenly exploded. And I'll never remember the reaction of some of the people in the class when the conversation ever so slightly shifted in this direction. These 7th graders, my peers, people I thought I knew, all of a sudden were up in arms that the science teacher would talk about such things. Apparently they had been indoctrinated at home, and I had not been, and so I wasn't really clued into the controversy. And it led to this teacher-parent-principal meeting in a few nights. And what's absolutely amazing in retrospect is that my mother actually let me come. You think about it, all these parents are there, these evangelical parents, and they're worried about what their kids are going to be learning in school. And they want to be able to tell the teacher, we don't want this stuff taught in our class because it contradicts our biblical beliefs, our fundamentalism. Our simple interpretation of the Bible is what we want our child to inherit from us. My mother had a different attitude. She asked me if I wanted to go, and I was there. I remember these people standing up, and I remember the tension that was there because I was there. And I was 13. I wasn't a kid, a young kid. But there were so many people there who did not want a child, any child, to hear about this. I remember the lights, I remember the raised tempers, I remember the principal up there, and I remember poor old John G. standing up there, probably thinking he was in a den of lions. So the reconciliation that happened is really the most interesting part of the story. They decided, I don't know who the decision maker in this issue was, but we all found out about it the following day in science class. John was going to be able to talk about what he wanted to talk about, which I think had radically changed, as we'll get to in a second. And the students of the parents who did not want their child exposed to that were to do something else during this lecture. And what they're supposed to do? Go to the library and do a short report on the clam. And as soon as he said this, these people whose parents were evangelicals in class, they just started to freak out. It's like, oh, they had extra work to do. They're being punished for their belief. And nonetheless, they all, after they got done screaming, they stood up and they marched like soldiers of fundamentalism to the library to do this supposed book report. I don't know if any of them ever actually did it or not, but they were supposed to go there and do research. on the clam instead of hear about evolution. And what's remarkable is that John then spent the little bit of time that he had allocated to talk about this, talking about how evolution and Genesis could be reconciled. Now, before this, within the year or so, I had already been thinking a lot about that, and so I already formed my own opinions, and I thought, his arguments were kind of silly and superficial and avoiding some of the real tension. But it was an important moment because I realized the nature of the difference between science and faith. And what's most interesting in retrospect is that I still have absolutely no knowledge of clams whatsoever. I don't know jack about clams. And someday I'm going to remedy that, like my creationist classmates. But instead of their approach, I think what I'm going to do is learn something about clam evolution.